In the closing lecture on the Aeneid, I want to discuss not only how the book ends, or how the poem ends rather, but what the legacy of Virgil is. I kind of want to summarize some of the things that I have hit upon in other lectures about the influence that Virgil has on later writers, and also on the identity of the Roman people, seeing themselves in light of the Aeneid. The book closes with Juno and Jupiter having a discussion. Jupiter says, "You must relent. At this point, Juno, this is inevitable. You know fate. You've got to let go." And Juno says, "Can't you see me here? I'm being meek. I have decided that, that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm not on the ground. I have decided that yes, it's okay, but can I make one request? Could you let the Latins retain their language, retain their culture, let Latium be, instead of becoming Trojan?" In other words, becoming more like the East, which they came from, which of course we would have to have her request this, because the Roman people don't have an Eastern identity in their culture. Instead, they have a Latin or Italian identity. So in order for this myth to be neatly tied up, Virgil must have some reason that instead of being more like Trojans or being more like the East, the Roman people are Western, right? They are more Italian than anything else. And so they see it as the fate of the gods that we have this one people. Jove decrees, "I grant your wish, you've won, I give up gladly." I give up, which is also a really interesting thing, "I give up gladly." Because what is he possibly giving up? He's not surrendering anything here. He's been neutral up until this point. And now he's saying, I'm relinquishing what? Your original idea that they were going to be Trojan? We don't have any backstory for what it is that he thinks he's surrendering over to her. But rhetorically, it's probably a good move to always say, "I surrender to you, Juno. I grant your wish, the Trojans will fade out as they breed in. I'll introduce their rights, but make one Latin people with one language, and you'll see the new race with Italian blood surpass the worlds and gods in piety." And you don't know how this would have allowed Juno to relent, right? That they are surpassing the gods, surpassing the world and the gods in piety. That what will be retained from the Trojans is the piety of Aeneas. That's what's going to make them all connected. In looking back at the scene where Aeneas seems to not be pious in the way that he kills Turnus, we're unsure exactly what this is going to look like. One way it could look is that piety, in this instance when he kills Turnus, is to be faithful to Evander, right, the king of the future site of Rome, to be faithful to Pallas, to be faithful to your people, to be faithful to Lavinia, who he will take as his bride, to not have her former lover still hanging around. What kind of piety does this mean, and what does this look like? But what is going to be retained from the Trojans will be their piety, and that's why we've had "I am pious Aeneas" as our father for this Roman country the entire time. The Latins will retain their culture and their language. So we have the manners and the language of the Latins that will overcome the Trojans in everything except for their piety. And in this way, the two are coming together. In a lot of ways, for those who are listening, the Romans who are listening, they've overcome a civil war, and now they are one people again. So Virgil is emphasizing the necessity of being one people and identifying themselves as one people, even though the Roman Empire is huge. This necessity of the oneness, the unity of things, would become crucial for the Pax Romana of Caesar Augustus, right? The peaceful kingdom that he wanted to last forever must have this sense of unity and being brought together as one. Now, the Aeneid immediately gets taught in classrooms. It's required reading for all Roman citizens, so it becomes kind of the classic textbook for all the Romans. And even hundreds of years later, while the Homeric epics are not being taught in school, everyone is reading the Aeneid. As we heard from Augustine, Augustine was required to know it by heart when he was a kid, that he would have learned it and been able to recite it in Latin, that he would have known this language backwards and forward, known the language of Virgil. and known the stories, that they would have been part of how he saw the world. And this continued up to Dante. You have Dante in the 14th century. Virgil is his master. Virgil is his teacher. He is writing the Divine Comedy in imitation of the Aeneid, in the same way that the Aeneid is an imitation of the Odyssey and the Iliad. Really, there's no end to how many references and allusions and structural model. The ways that the Aeneid influences the Divine Comedy are just limitless. There are so many to look at. So this text really does become very transformative for the Western identity. Even, as I've mentioned before, the creation of America, this idea that it's the new England in the same way that we have the new Troy and Rome. So we have this model for what it means to be a new nation, a new country, and this example of the father and the fatherland, the piety that he brings forward. So the Aeneid does not end in 19 BC when Virgil dies. Thankfully, it was never burned, and its effect is long-lasting through art, through music, the operas that have been made from it, through poetry, the ways that it has affected poets' imaginations, and the ways that it has affected the Western and cultural imagination, that it's really one of the founding stories of Western civilization.